I want to go to work with my jetpack.
Pee water up my legs. Like, what the fuck? I don't want a bidet, and certainly not a bidet with urine and fecal matter water. I don't understand what...
Holy pee. Good evening, and welcome to the Church of Awesome.
The church to end all churches.
I will be conducting today. I am Cardinal Imam Spencer, son of Hagar.
Peace be upon him.
Presiding today will be Demi-Pope Chris. We also have the Archangel Michael.
Yeah.
And Bill.
Today we'll be discussing confirmation bias.
So what is confirmation bias?
Confirmation bias is a person's tendency to remember what agrees with their preconceived notion and forget what doesn't.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's not a conscious thing. It's a subconscious thing. So the example I heard was that if you're investigating buying a car and you hear like, oh, Chevy trucks are better than Ford trucks, and then you buy a Chevy truck, on that, your research is done. You've already decided that Chevy is better than Ford, and so every time you see a Ford broken down on the side of the road, you remember it and go, ha, that's because it's a shitty Ford. And you never notice if you see a Chevy on the side of the road, you just gotta go like, this car broke down, it's a shame. But you never really make the connection, oh, that's a Chevy truck broken down. You only mark it if it's what you already believe.
Yeah, my favorite example is if you already think, for example, Asians are bad drivers, every time you're driving on the road and someone does some bonehead move on the freeway, you'll look at them, and when it's any Asian person driving, you go, yeah, see? And then when you see it and it's not an Asian person,
and some dude looks just like you, yeah.
Yeah, you will forget it. You go, yeah, the last several times that I saw some idiot doing something stupid on the freeway, it was an Asian guy, even though you probably saw something stupid on the freeway because it is California or it is the United States. Several people of different colors and things doing stupid shit on the freeway. But in your mind, it's still Asians are bad drivers.
One of my favorite and most accessible versions of this is the toilet seat up, toilet seat down thing that women will say. If you ask a woman, how often do you have to put the toilet seat down because your husband left it up or something, and they'll say, oh, it's all the time, and they'll say that it's like, oh, it's like 70% of the time I need to do that. And then if you ask men, how often do you remember to put the toilet seat down, they'll say like, almost all the time, pretty much every time. But any time that the woman notices that the seat is not put down, then she'll exaggerate that because that's what she's already thinking. Yeah.
And just along those lines, how come I have to lift the seat up every time? What the fuck?
And have they done studies that show that it's that neither one is actually correct, where it's like, I don't know,
well, it's just that men will overestimate the amount of the time that they remember, and then the women will overestimate the amount of times that they forget. And that's just because we tend to... It also plays into what we like to think about ourselves. Yes. Like, everyone's the hero in their own story. Yes.
Everyone likes to think they're right, you mean?
Yeah. Part of it's the way our brains work. We look for patterns. We're specifically seeking out patterns in everything that we experience. And so when we have this preconceived pattern, we want to reinforce that in our brain. It feels good to have reinforcement of what we already believe. Mm-hmm. So anything that comes up to the contrary, we're going to dismiss. Mm-hmm. Or try and justify away or something like that. But anything that happens to fit in with our nice little version of the world, we tend to latch onto that.
Yeah, and just accept it as part of the evidence of why.
Yes. If it conforms to our belief, it's the rule, and if it goes against it, it's the exception.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
If I remember my psychology 101 terms correctly, I think the word was schema, which is our mental framework as the way we see the world. Mm-hmm. And when we receive new information, it either fits within our pre-modeled framework or it doesn't. So you have the choice to either marginalize or deny the new information that doesn't fit with what you already think, or you have to adjust your schema or your pre-modeled framework to incorporate the new information.
Which is difficult to do. So
what tends to happen is we ignore it or rationalize it away.
Because we use the phrase open-minded or closed-minded or narrow-minded. I always immediately think of that vocabulary word, because someone who is closed-minded does not at all want to adjust the way they look at things. They think everything's already been figured out, and I've already figured it out. And if it's something that doesn't make sense to me, then it's just nonsense, or it's the ramblings of an apostate. If someone is open-minded, they go, look, I don't have it all figured out. It's actually a lot more humble if you think about it. Like, this is new information. We don't know everything. Like, science doesn't claim to know everything. Otherwise, it would stop, right? Mm-hmm. So this is new information. We're constantly seeking to understand better. We want to break down our framework and build the correct thing.
Well, analyze what we believe and kind of be able to accept that anything that we believe now could be proven false later.
Yeah, Dawkins tells a story about when he was in college, and one of his teachers had been working on a theory for 20 years, and when it was proven wrong, he was so excited. Like, he wasn't disappointed that his life's work was proven wrong. He was just thrilled that science advanced. I thought that was really cool.
Mm-hmm. Well, I bet he was disappointed.
Well, certainly, but
as anybody would be, because nobody likes to be wrong.
Right? He didn't act like an apologist or
exactly.
try and justify.
You just let it go because you're like, look, the evidence is not with me, so I gotta follow where the evidence is, whether or not it fits my preconceived notions.
But water does have memory.
Well, that's like the placebo effect, and like that's why we have controls or placebo-controlled, double-blinded trials and stuff like that. It's because if you hypothesize something, you're hypothesizing it. You kind of want that to play out the way that you hypothesized, and when it doesn't, it's kind of like yeah. But that's where the bias can sneak in.
We atheists are often called arrogant because we look for information, we think we know everything, when it's just really the exact opposite. It's projecting on their part. They're saying that we act like we know everything, and so we don't believe in God. Well, actually, it's because we don't know everything that we look for new information, and the God hypothesis has long since failed, and we have no use for it.
Well, it has no explanatory power.
Yeah, and they think, because when I was a believer, I didn't believe necessarily that I knew everything, but I had access to someone who did. And if it's something I need to know, then I could just ask, and I have the ability to do anything because God is all-powerful and I'm one of his servants.
And if it's something you don't know, then you're just like, I don't need to know it.
Exactly.
If I needed to know it, I would know it.
Yeah, and it makes you, it murders your intellectual curiosity. It's because if you think, for example, I don't have to really worry about nuclear deterrence or anything because Jesus is going to come in within 20 years probably, and then don't have to worry about global warming or any of the major problems that we have to deal with because long-term problems.
God's got it in hand. He can deal with it.
I don't need to learn about optics because I know that rainbows are just made by God as a symbol of not being mad at people anymore.
And fucking magnets, how do they work?
So confirmation bias isn't necessarily a social thing like our arrogance, our culture thinking we're number one and we're always right. Because people do like to be told that they're right because it's comforting and all that shit. But you're saying that's also like a scientific, genetic sort of thing, like.
Yeah, I mean you see it everywhere. Everyone does it. There's nobody on the planet that doesn't do this to some extent. Now you can, by becoming aware of it, you can help point out the confirmation bias in your own life and help have a more skeptical mind, a more open mind. It's a very natural process that occurs, and it's something that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons for the whole scientific process being invented was to circumvent our own biases to actually acquire knowledge, to become right instead of think we are right.
Yeah, confirmation bias is just one of the biases that you attempt to control for in an experiment. So you do stuff like taking yourself out of the equation. If you got this hypothesis, well, okay, maybe I shouldn't run this study, maybe I should have an unbiased third-party person administering this, who's blind to the conditions. It's where the double-blind study comes from, so you don't have observation bias. You don't have participant bias. If nobody knows which condition they're in, they're going to act more naturally.
Sure, can you give us a specific example?
Okay, good try.
Sort of fabricate a...
pull it out of your ass.
Well, what they do a lot in medication studies is they will have doctors who check people and are evaluating them on a constant basis, have no idea which patients are on the drug and which patients are on a placebo. At the same point, the patients have no idea if they're on the actual drug or on a placebo. And so it makes it easier to give a comparison for how well the drug's actually working.
Yeah, I mean, on the other hand, you would have like people funding the study who want to get the results that this drug works and it's amazing. And so if they go and say, hey, patient, you're going to take this drug and it's going to make you feel better, then, you've got a whole lot of biases and placebo effects in play that will give you false positives.
Yes.
There was a radio commercial I heard. It was for some kind of labeling tape. Like you can label your bins at work or whatever. And I was listening to the radio, and it says it's been statistically proven that the average American worker loses about a week of productivity per year just because they can't find stuff, like their pencils or whatever thing has been knocked over, and their papers are a disaster. I mean, makes sense. But what it said right after that was, and of all the organization professionals, like 9 out of 10 of them recommended Brothers brand label tape. I'm like, whoa, hang on a second. That immediately raised a red flag to me because my guess in the study, they didn't offer other brands. And obviously it's like if the choice is between labeling anything and labeling nothing, then of course any intelligent professional is going to say, yes, label stuff so you know where it is. But what they did is they singled out the brand name because it was for the two brothers, whatever the hell that brand is. I thought that was like, whoa.
So in advertising, they use all kinds of tricks to make things look like statistics that aren't.
Yeah.
The 4 out of 5 dentists recommend one is the classic example. They don't say that 80% of dentists recommend. They say 4 out of 5, which gives the illusion of 80%. They could have asked 75 dentists which one they prefer. And they found 4 that prefer this one. And so they selected those 4 and one other one. Because if you said 5 out of 5 dentists, everybody's going to go, bullshit.
Yeah. And they didn't say 4 out of every 5.
No, yeah, it's just 4 out of 5.
It's just,
that tends to be what goes on.
Ways of lying without, it's not deliberate lying. Well, it is deliberate lying, but it's not. It's lying, but also covering your ass at the same time.
There was another example, not unlike the labeling tape one that I had a conversation with someone a while ago. I had mentioned that I saw the puppet show that was at Disney's California Adventure with the Playhouse Disney, and I was really impressed by the way they were telling cute stories, but they were also teaching almost like moral lessons to children, but without any of the superstition. And I was saying like why it was so much better than primary, and the response to that was, Baby Einstein was one of them. It's been proven to slow down language learning. I'm like, what? And so I looked up the actual study, and what it said...
It's like 4 out of 5 children.
No. What it said was that in the first few months of life, we get the most benefit from face-to-face contact with an actual human being rather than some put-in DVD of any kind. And Baby Einstein wasn't even specifically mentioned in that study, I don't think. But it wasn't the heart of it, saying the first 3 or 4 months of life, that's where you should be getting human interaction rather than a DVD, and then after that, it doesn't matter. The babies that were done just DVDs and no human interaction, they learned 7 or 8 words, fewer per, I forget what the thing was, but that is not saying that all baby Einsteins are evil, but that's a conclusion that the
Yeah, it's just
person-
extrapolating out a study to something it doesn't apply to, and that's headline writers do that all the time because that's probably what the headline was.
And there's a lot of issues with those kind of studies. First of all, it's all correlational data due to ethical reasons. We can't just systematically try shit on kids. You know, you can't say, you know, these kids, we're not going to let them see their mother. We're going to have them do Baby Einstein instead. Right. And so you're going to have sampling error. What kind of parents just set their kid in front of the TV, and what kind of parents actually, you know, interact with their kids. You know, it shows a total different level of...
Yeah, it's a self-selecting group. Basically.
Exactly. You got a totally different sample set. And so you can say, well, yeah, you know, kids that did this were more likely to. You can't say that this is causing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just so inherently dishonest to take that and say, see, Baby Einstein DVDs are evil because they make your children stupid. Well, that's not what the study said. That's what you.
Well, and I don't even
made
think
up
they're
from.
doing it like. I think they're trying to extrapolate it out. Like we see a small effect in a very limited circumstance, and they say, "Oh, this is, you know, we've proven this," and so they just extrapolate it out to what it could mean. And I think generally they actually think that they just don't know how to interpret those results.
I mean, it's a sweeping generalization.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah,
it's
you had
dishonest.
the same thing back in the 70s when they started doing all these studies about, you know, playing classical music to your kid in the womb, you know, and it was like same kind of sampling bias, you know. What kind of parents were giving their kids Mozart? You know, they were well-educated, upper middle class, you know, people that were going to be giving their kids private tutors and all these other things, and it's like, oh, they do amazing in school. Well, yeah.
Because their parents give a shit.
Exactly.
The same kind of parents that are even consciously aware of the ability to super nurture your kid are going to be the same kind that actually read studies and actually put the headphones up to the bump in your stomach. There was another random psychology thing I kind of wanted to talk about. I remember I'm pretty sure it was a psychology class, we were talking about vision and perception, and the fact that our eyes are never actually perfectly still. They're always constantly moving a little bit, because if it does, then it starts to tune out. Basically, like, we were wired to look for changes.
Yes.
That's how we survived as a species, is things that were out of the ordinary. Any anomalies immediately got our attention. And if they're static, then, like, if you ever stared at one thing for long enough, you kind of have more blind spots building up like that, and the picture gets kind of less clear if you're staring at one thing for a very, very long time. But that in normal operation, our eyes are they're always constantly moving just a tiny bit.
Yeah, that's also because of just the physiology of it. The nerves that are collecting that data, if they're firing the same information, you get diminished returns.
Yes.
So it's the nerves themselves just wear out, so they need to be sending different stuff. It's kind of like the reason that you had to have a screensaver on old computer monitors, because, you know, it just gets burned in. So it's
I thought that was fascinating, and it's funny because it reminds me. I work in a key shop, and we have one of those like 7-Eleven alarms that go off when someone walks in and goes ding ding. You know, we have a customer and all that stuff, and I'm always just amazed that people can stand underneath that thing and constantly set off that thing. And you know, we've got our Pavlovian response where as soon as I hear the bell, I get up and I walk to the front and say, hey, how's it going? What can I do for you, kind of a thing. But the standing for a line, and it's not like the line's so long it goes out the door and they have no choice. They're just standing there and going, ba-dum, 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 ba, and they are completely unaware of it. And I just can't help but think and almost say to them sometimes, you know, you would have gotten your ass eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, you moron, because you are not able to spot out, like, they are unaware that that's even being caused by them. Now, if I walk in and I hear an alarm like that, my first reaction is, you know, where's that sound coming from? That's just natural curiosity. And then my next question usually, am I causing this? Am I responsible?
Well, you need to remember that we're desensitizing ourselves to any kind of repetitive stimuli. So whether it's auditory, visual, you know, tactile, whatever, if you are always experiencing this same sound, you will eventually tune it out if it's not important.
Right. Well, like car alarms, we never pay attention.
Exactly. When car alarms first came out, whenever one went off, everybody's going, "Oh my God, what?"
Someone's stealing a car.
Someone should do something. Not me, of course.
2 years later, after hearing these damn things go off night and day, nobody gives a fuck.
Yeah, I certainly don't. I just get annoyed, like, ugh, it's loud and it's unpleasant tone. But I'm still not going to get up and do anything about it.
It's like, I hope someone steals that car and drives it away from here so I don't hear it anymore.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens with anything. So, and it's really quite natural. I mean, all animals do it. You think my favorite example are the bears in Yellowstone, which you never see anymore, but 20, 30 years ago, there were bears everywhere, right down into the cities. People were feeding them out of their cars. The fact is, bears naturally have a huge fear of humans. That's why they attack you. It's because they're scared. It's fight or flight response. They're bigger, they fight, And what happens is, after years and years and years of dealing with people, they got used to the people and lost their fear. And so then they'd come right down in and get right next to you. But if you did something out of the ordinary to spook them, fight or flight kicks in, they smack your head and you're dead.
So why do we see them anymore? Or do we see them a lot?
They tranquilized them all and drug them off into the backwoods where they wouldn't be exposed to people back in the late 70s, early 80s. And they keep them there. If they get too close to people, they go out and they trap them and take them back to the deep woods, where it's safer for the bears, it's safer for people.
Yeah, it's just better all around. Well, and they don't get a dependency on human food.
That's right. It maintains a much more naturalistic life for the animal.
I'm wondering how long it took them to kick the habit of Twinkies and hot dogs. Yeah. So another conversation I thought would be fun to have would be talking about nature versus nurture. Any rational person, by the way, the nature versus nurture argument is what makes up what we are. Is it primarily nature or our genetics and how how our body is made up and all that, or as if it's predetermined, or is it a nurture that you get from your upbringing? Any rational person is going to say it's obviously a combination of both, but I love hearing the arguments on each side saying it's 100% nurture. As if everything's done by nature, then you really can't be responsible for your action, I suppose, because everything is just like, I can't help it, I have to drink or whatever.
Well, and from that end, even with the nurture argument, it doesn't really give an answer to that, because if it's all how you were growing up, you also have no responsibility for your actions, because, hey, man, it was just how I was raised.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. But you have more control if everything's nurtured, like, I guess because... it depends on when the true impact of the nurturing ends, because if, say, you're 20 years old, you moved out of the house, and it's all nurture, then you can take responsibility, you can take charge of your life and become the architect of your own destiny, right? But if it ends like everything up until 5 or 6 years old is where your formative years, and
that's what set you on the course for the rest of your life.
Your parents screwed you up, so I think it's a fascinating argument, because I mean, like, you can super nurture a kid, but if he's just not that bright, like, you can take an autistic kid and put him in front of the History Channel, and he's probably not going to outperform the average person.
Yeah, it's really hard to say, and it's a debate that is really hard to get to the bottom of. Once again, for the same kind of ethical concerns that we can't be doing scientific experiments on children,
Because the ideal experiment would be that you have identical twins that are genetically identical, and you separate them and raise them in vastly different environments. But that's just not an ethical experiment to do. To take one to like the savannah of Africa, and put one in some posh neighborhood.
And they all do studies on like long lost twins and see the similarities.
Yeah, see, if it happens naturally, then you can study it. But the thing is that's also a self-selecting group.
Yeah, and it's a pretty rare.
Yeah, you
thing,
can't
imagine.
randomize that.
Generally, what they look for and where they're getting actual results is when you're looking at psychological disorders like depression or anxiety or schizophrenia, and you've got identical twins adopted, separated at birth, raised in different environments, and you say, okay, if one has it, what's the probability the other has it? And you're finding anything from, in some cases it's 60-70%, in some cases it's 4 or 5%. And so it's kind of case by case. Some things are very much,
nature, and some are very much nurture.
Others are very much nurture. Generally, it's never 100% of either. If you've got the gene for it, you are much more likely than if you don't have the gene for it. But at the same point, having the gene for most of these psychological disorders is never enough. It usually requires some kind of environmental stressor to trigger it. The big one that everybody thinks of is schizophrenia, because it's such a debilitating, all-encompassing disease. I mean, it's a complete break from reality. And the numbers on that are about 50%. If you have the gene for it, you have about a 50% chance of getting the disease, is all. Which ought to be, all right, even if I got the gene, at least it's only 50-50, but...
I like those odds.
Flip a coin.
And as the field grows older, we'll have a much easier time understanding more of this as we get more data, because the field's only 120 years old. And before that, psychological disorders were pretty much all explained away as demons or some kind of possession by the devil, and they locked them up or killed them or whatever.
Lobotomized them or something.
Yes. And really, psychology started in the late 19th century, but really didn't get going until the mid 20th century. So we only have 60 years of data on this stuff.
Well, and just genetics, our ability to analyze genetic information.
Yeah, now you're talking about
we're just
only
in
a
the
20 or 30 year
yeah.
window,
So let's talk business then. Like, how are these things exploited by large corporations and advertising?
Oh, well, it's all advertising. I mean, it's just like you said. You said that you had a little red flag go off when you heard that advertisement, but to most people that sounds perfectly normal. That when they hear that 4 out of 5 dentists, they just assume that's 80%. But anything that you hear in advertising at all is because, advertising is just a lying game. Because, your product may be the best, but regardless of whether your product is the best, you have to say it's the best. You have to convince people it's the best.
And really, salesmen, that's what they're called, they've been exploiting, kind of pop psychology for centuries without really a systematic scientific study of the field. They were doing all these techniques, and then psychologists go and study it, and they go, well, yeah. That works because of X,
so they were
Y,
always ahead of the curve just because there's so many of them trying to do it. So you just study the successes of advertising, and then you'll find the psychology that underlines it.
All the foot in the door techniques, or the whatever else,
or sex sells.
Yeah.
It's interesting because they'll kind of study the culture, like, okay, what do people like, and then they'll like it almost seems like a scientific way that they try and figure out how to dupe people.
It is. Yeah.
Well, nowadays they very much do.
That's the science of lying.
Yeah, watch Mad Men.
Yep.
Not just for this, because it's also a great show.
Also,
not just for Christina Hendricks, but for
January Jones too.
Yeah, also, yeah.
These tactics that religion uses is fear. That's one of the big things that advertisement goes to. That's one of the big things that particularly politics, news, they prey on people's fear to gain interest.
It's motivational. It's probably the most motivational emotion.
Yes.
Like, if you want what's best for your baby, you'll buy in the 100% grape juice from Welch's, kind of a thing.
Because so-and-so's grape juice causes cancer, or, whatever.
Or your kid will invariably go to a life of crime if it's 98% juice.
Yes.
Yeah, it's been studied.
Yes.
4 to 5 kids.
Yeah,
it's been clinically proven.
Yeah.
God, that one's abused, too.
Yeah.
Clinically proven. And what fucking clinic? Is it like the Betty Ford clinic or something? What the hell?
One of the big ways that religious types use confirmation bias is in trying to come up with ways to justify their ridiculous beliefs with the facts that they see around them, all the blessings that they see. How, they see all these people that are doing the right thing and how they're so blessed, and that all how the wickedness is bringing all this misery to people that don't have the gospel.
Yeah, they just hunt out sad people that aren't religious and happy people that are, and then use those as evidence, and they ignore.
Or they take somebody who's not religious and they look for the unpleasant things in their life, and then find the religious people and look for the pleasant things in their life. Where in fact, everybody I've ever come into contact with has ups and downs in their life, good parts and bad parts.
Yeah, I'm spotting you've got confirmation bias, anomaly hunting, post hoc rationalization, like a...
Oh, yes.
It's getting fun.
Go down the list.
Name that logical fallacy.
Yes.
I love that.
It's just different names for the same thing, and like a lot of these that just have a lot of overlap.
That's true. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap. I mean, most of the stuff I do is post hoc rationalization.
So I was talking to somebody recently who said that they didn't like statistics because they didn't like math. And that kind of blew me away, because I'm like, yeah, statistics does have a lot of math, but statistics is more about a mentality of understanding the world in terms that humans generally don't. We tend to judge our own experiences and the people that we know, and we just, we live with small sample sizes, and we just attribute cause and effect very cavalierly. We'll just say like, hey, I did this and then this happened, so anytime I do this will happen. But
that's interesting. I never really thought of statistics as being kind of a worldview and an inherent skepticism. That's cool, because I remember I had to take a statistics class for my major, criminal justice, and I was my least favorite class because it was just a bunch of data collecting, but it was actually quite an eye opener too, thinking of things like properly setting up an experiment and interpreting data honestly and things like that.
Exactly.
It was. I think everyone should take a stats class. But man, you got to have a good teacher for that.
Well, and you have to not focus so much on the numbers, which is the how of statistics. But as we are now, people just aren't good at interpreting numbers, large sets of numbers particularly. And a lot of times, there's the law of large numbers that I've been reading about recently, that if you have a fair coin and you start to flip it, you may flip it once and it comes up heads. And if you just made an assumption based on that one flip, you go, oh yeah, anytime I flip this, it'll be heads. And then you're like, oh, maybe I should test this further, flip it 2 more times, and it's like, oh, just by chance I happen to get heads 2 more times. You're like, okay, definitely, it's 100% heads. But the more you flip it, the more you will gravitate towards that 50-50 that we know a fair coin flip to be.
Now, I know it is a metaphor, but shouldn't a rational person look at it, there's a coin and there's 2 sides? It's just as likely that it'll land on one side of the coin as the other. You have a 1 in 2 chance.
It's not necessarily the assumption that you can make. And that's kind of what the law of large numbers is for, because if you have a coin that if you don't know, because there are things in physics, the way that it's weighted, where its center of gravity is, how it's being flipped, you can factor all those in, and like you could actually make a machine that flips a coin that always lands up heads, just because of the way that the force is applied. You put it in a vacuum chamber so that no other things can affect it, or
If the say the tail side is actually heavier, will that make it land tails down, heads up?
The way that it's shaped too. I mean, if you have like a beveled edge instead of a flat edge, then if it's beveled more on one side than the other, then that will increase the likelihood it'll land on the more deeply beveled side. But if you flip that coin 1,000,000 times and it lands exactly 50-50, then it's a fair coin, because you get a lot of trials and it's hitting that 50-50. Then it's with a fairly strong confidence you can say that it's a fair coin, that it's going to be 50-50. But if you only flip it 5-6 times, then that doesn't give you enough information to draw that conclusion.
Yeah, we did a fun little game in a psychology class when I was in college, where he had half of the class flip a coin 25 times and write down heads or tails, which it was each time. And he had the other half of the class just make up heads or tails each time. and pass them in. And he pretty much with about 90% of the time was able to tell just by looking at them which ones were actual coin flips and which ones were made up. Because our assumption of 50-50 is that, okay, we had a couple heads, so a tails is going to come up. Whereas if you flip a coin 25 times, the likelihood of having 4 in a row is actually pretty high,
At some point in it.
Yeah,
like at a given point.
At any given point,
It's not very high, but that's kind of the gambler's fallacy thing, where someone's like, "Oh, I lost 3 times in a row. I'm due for a win now."
Yes.
It's like, no, that doesn't make you any more likely.
Unless you're counting cards.
Yeah. Or like in the roulette wheels, you'll have little digital displays above them.
Yes, the running tally of which ones came up.
You're like, oh, well, that means, what does that mean? That doesn't mean fucking anything.
Yes, because they're independent
trials.
trials.
It means the universe owes you one.
Yeah. It's like, well, it was already 25, so it can't come up 25 now.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just playing off the fact
6 blacks in a row. Red is due.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just,
and
odds don't have memories.
And that's the big point of this, is that any given trial, is going to have an equal likelihood of coming out, right? So,
but the set of trials doesn't have to conform to the stated probability.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I'm saying by that is, shit. I lost my train of thought. Any given trial or any given outcome has the same statistical probability of any other, given the set probability of the system. So if you have an equal probability of heads or tails on any given throw, any sequence of throws is going to be just as likely as any other sequence of throws.
Yeah, that's one thing that people just...
You throw a coin 10 times. What's the likelihood of hitting heads 9 times in a row and then a tails, versus hitting heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, heads, tails, whatever.
Yeah,
the probability is exactly the same.
Yeah.
As soon as you go into this exact order, every chant or every sequence has the same
because then you're testing something different. You're testing your ability to predict 10 throws in a row, which is very unlikely.
Yes.
So whatever, I don't even remember how to calculate them, but it's all, it's like I said, it's the outlook more than it's the actual math.
Yes.
To me, because I think people just don't understand it. Because nobody would give that answer if you asked, if you ask 4 out of 5 people on the street.
But if the coin has 2 sides, and you...
Yeah, what is the likelihood that it will land on the edge? Yeah.
And it's funny, name this logical fallacy, because I pretty much I sort of assumed that I had taken everything into account by saying it's a coin that has 2 sides, it has to be 50-50, but there's so many other factors that I didn't even take into account. Mm-hmm. What would you call that?
I don't know, that seems like just hasty generalization.
There you go.
Something like that.
I need to have a ding sound.
I don't know. That's my guess. There are so many logical fallacies and then subsets of those logical fallacies that I'm sure you can narrow it down into an even more specific one. But
yeah, I do like the idea of pointing out. It's like even we do it.
Yeah. Well, and it's even just just being aware of when you're doing it yourself. It's learning when you're wrong to become right is a very important skill.
Agreed.
I like being shown to be wrong.
Yeah, and that's something that kind of bothers me in today's society is people don't like being corrected. Like, there's obviously don't be a dick about correcting someone's grammar all the time. But I mean, like, when I lived and worked in Argentina, I learned the language so that I could live and work in Argentina, and people could understand me. And they were not polite at all about correcting me how bad my Spanish was at the beginning of it. I mean, I eventually got to a point where people told me how good I was, but immediate, very sharp correction, I just kind of got used to it. So people can tell me you're doing this wrong, and it doesn't hurt my ego or anything. It's just like, oh, thank you for pointing that out for me, because what's more embarrassing, saying a word wrong and getting corrected in front of people, maybe a little embarrassed, or saying that same thing wrong
For the rest of your life. And then having people make fun of you behind your back for it.
Yeah, it's a
instead of
net
telling you.
benefit of colossal proportions, and
Yeah.
I don't understand why people don't appreciate that. And I mean, I don't, and I've gotten to a point where I don't really correct people anymore. It's like, yeah, fine, if you don't
You're
want
right. It's just an ego thing. That's people that, and you know, it's people want to be right. People don't want to. People don't want to go through what it takes to be right, but they just want to be right.
Yeah, it's so childish to me. I don't understand it.
Yeah, you see that a lot in the business world. I mean, any boss you've had, you can't correct your boss. Is what everybody has observed in their workplace. You don't correct the boss because he wants to be right. He doesn't want to be corrected.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly, like, if you ever sit in a Sunday school session where someone's asking too many questions, they'll get marginalized.
Yeah.
Say,
This is not the place for questions.
yeah. Or, that's an interesting question. You should look it up, or I'll look it up and get back to you, but they never do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I almost won. Because I was that kid in college that always asked questions because I wanted to understand it. And I wasn't so afraid that people thought I was stupid, because I also had a strong feeling that everyone had the same question, but they were just too shy to ask it.
Yeah,
It's
that's
like,
usually the case. Or they're not paying enough attention to even have the question in their mind.
true. It's like, I'm here because I want to learn it. If I didn't care, I wouldn't be showing up to class every day on time. So
Yeah, and when I'm doing, because I do trainings and I teach occasionally, and when someone asks me a question, it can kind of point out that I didn't explain something satisfactorily, or something that makes sense to me but won't make sense to somebody who's hearing it for the
Yes.
first time, or someone who's not familiar with whatever field I have to be talking about. So I think questions are always good for all involved.
Yes, it's what they say. The worst question is the one that's never asked. And I do like the there's no such thing as a stupid question. Like,
My favorite
there
version
is,
of that is there are no stupid questions, only stupid people asking questions.
And I mean, it's true, because it's like, here's a stupid question: where's the birth certificate?
Yeah. It's like, I don't want to discourage people from
Where are
asking
the
questions.
transitional fossils?
Yeah.
There's a stupid question.
Yeah, well, that's willful ignorance.
Exactly, because it's like you're not asking a question.
Yeah, you're not an honest seeker of truth, and they
Exactly.
seldom are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is another dishonest thing about religion that bothers me immensely.
Yeah, that's not all religion though. That's only the ones that see evolution as a as a challenge to them.
This day and age, you can find information on in any subject in abundance. If you want to know something, you can learn about it. You know, you can download for free college lectures that have been recorded from, prestigious universities. You have the fucking Google search. Like, we're kind of out of excuses now.
Well, you can, but also since there's so much information available, you can go into a little cave of ignorance where you can just hear the echoes of the same people saying the same wrong information.
Right, then you get into research methods and how you...
Exactly, but they don't talk about that. If they don't want you to investigate what they're talking about, they won't tell you how. So like the Institute for Creation Research, for example, they're not going to talk about any research methods, because if you knew about them, then you would see that every research they do is flawed.
There's a whole podcast called Evidence for Faith, and like that is a complete contradiction in terms. Yeah, and it's like the reason to believe it is because it's true. That's
not a reason.
yeah, that's restating your problem.
Yeah, it's like
not
that's
an answer.
a tautautology. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is. Ding. I'm gonna find a sound effect for that.
Ding.
Tautology.
So let's talk about how the law of large numbers applies to religion.
Let's see.
Everyone believes it, so it has to be true.
Well, that's the argument from popularity.
Ding.
Yeah,
Argument from popularity.
The one that I always think of is the whole, creationists like to say, well, what are the odds that this came out of nothing, that just by random chance happened? It's like, you know what, that's pretty small. But when you have an infinitely large sample set, your probability of any one outcome happening approaches 1. So
Yeah,
one
which is,
as in 100%?
Yeah.
What that means? Okay.
yes.
yeah, probability of 1 just means because you do percentages with just point something. So when they say probability of 1, it's 1 0.00, which is 100%.
Okay, just want to make sure I get that right.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the law of truly large numbers, because the law of large numbers is like a statistical thing. Then the law of truly large numbers is, in any, once the sample size gets large enough, you're virtually guaranteed any particular outcome. That's how, since the numbers of pi are infinite and non-repeating, that means that in some part of pi is listed your phone number, as well as the phone number of all your friends, your address, your social security number.
36, 24, 36.
Yes, your measurements.
Only if she's 5'3".
And that's the monkeys at a typewriter thing, where if you've got just random text generators, they don't mean actual monkeys, of course, because those have a finite lifespan. But if you had something that generated random letters,
the immortal monkeys at a typewriter.
Yeah, there you go.
Sounds like a band name.
Yeah. But if you have some sort of randomly generating mechanism, something that will infinitely, it would have to be for longer than the age of the universe to get something like the works of Shakespeare, but the outcome is inevitable given infinite time.
Yeah, I am reminded of the William Shakespeare quotes in the Bible. If you where certain words at the end of a page, if you flip it and then go to the end of another one.
Oh, you're talking about like the Bible code stuff.
Yeah. Given enough words, you can extract any manner of bullshit.
Yeah, especially if you've already got confirmation bias on you, that you're like, this has all sorts of cool stuff, and you're pattern seeking already. You're just looking for the pattern in the static.
That's the good old Texas sharpshooter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fallacy, which is my personal favorite.
Texas sharpshooter fallacy. And what is that?
That is where you take the imagery given is you have somebody just shoot up the side of a barn to Kingdom Come, and then afterwards you take the areas where the random bullet holes join up and you draw a bullseye right there, and then it looks like, oh, he's this really great shot, he hit all these different bullseyes.
Yeah, it's just defining success after you've already
the
acquired
spray and pray success declaration.
Well, it's just like, this is you're not defining, you got to define success before you do the trial. If you're defining it after you're doing the trial, then you can just define success as whatever the outcome of the trial was.
Mm-hmm. So I know I'm kind of going into cartoony, satirical generalization, but we're talking about confirmation bias. It truly warps the way you actually perceive things. Now, I'm reminded of the episode of South Park with the fish sticks joke, where you watch it evolve from Cartman's in the room while the joke is being written to Cartman saving the day and slaying a dragon. And everyone telling him how not fat he is throughout the whole thing. Like, he's clearly delusional.
Yeah, that's probably more symptom of. It's kind of a play on something we all do, but it's taken to a ridiculous extreme to the point that it would probably be diagnosable as a disorder.
Yeah, because Cartman probably has a lot of things.
Well, Cartman is a sociopath, and
that's true.
But we all do that a little bit. He's an exaggerated caricature so that we can see the things that we all do. You always exaggerate your point to make it more salient.
Because everyone's a hero of their own story, so we all do in our own way slay dragons, and people tell us how not fat we are. I love that. Yeah, I found that amusing and pretty thought-provoking. It's like, I wonder if I do that. Probably.
Probably a statistically significant amount of the time.
Yeah. The people who think that they are God's holy soldiers and everything either fits with what they think or it doesn't. So, right back at the beginning, it's either you're going to marginalize or reject it, or it will happen to agree with you and you'll keep it and it'll reinforce you. The confirmation bias will be all these things I see testify of a creator and that I am on his holy errand, and everything that shows things like the Bible being plagiarized or evolution is incredibly obvious. It gets
exactly. It's like
the window.
Yeah, it only is evidence for what you believe if you already believe it. But to get back on statistics, we can use statistics to tell about the confidence about the statements that we make. You can see that this causes this to this degree of probability. So, or with this amount of confidence. If you don't understand that at all, then you'll tend to look at the world as a black and white thing. That's just like, this does this. But when you look at basically any causal relationship or just anything at all, you realize it's like, a certain percentage of the time this does this, a certain percentage of the time it doesn't. Or it does this, but there are these other factors involved which can influence the outcome of this causal relationship. It helps to not see the world in black and white, which is why I think everybody should take it.
And now for our fatwas of the week. I'd like to start by declaring jihad on scientists for not having jetpacks already. I mean, seriously, it's the 21st century. We should have flying cars, jetpacks, all that cool shit that they've been putting in movies for 80 years.
They've been promising us these things.
That's right, damn it. Get your act together.
And didn't they have a guy in a rocket pack at Disneyland in the 60s?
Yeah, that was compressed air, though.
That's you talking more like Rocketeer rocket packs?
Yeah, I mean, rocket packs that could do more than just, like, go up for 30 seconds and come back down.
Like, I want to go to work with my jetpack.
And there's no more cars. Everyone just has jetpacks, and there's jetpack landing sites.
Well, I mean, because people run into each other when they're walking, and we have enough accidents when people are walking.
Well, we could have sky lanes.
You mean like in Back to the Future 2?
No, I was thinking Fifth Element, but yeah.
My issue with the flying car is that, again, people can't drive. And
you're just adding one more dimension they can fuck up.
Yeah, I don't want retards in cars falling from the sky and landing on me. It's bad enough. Can you imagine?
But jetpacks, you must concede that jetpacks would be awesome.
I like many good futuristic things, technology. I would like just me and my close friends to have them because they're not stupid. But the general populace having jetpacks.
Yeah, well, that's probably what people said about cars too.
Yeah, you just make it very rigorous training.
Yeah.
Weed out the dumbasses that are gonna crash into
somebody's house. You have to go to the DMV.
So you can't have
jetpack license.
You can't have illegal immigrants getting jetpack licenses, right? So.
Well, my jihad this week is on vitamin water, because it's called vitamin water, but it's just pretty much water with just enough flavor in it so that it tastes bad. If I just want water, I'll just drink water. If I want flavor, I will have anything but vitamin water, because it tastes like shit and doesn't have any magical properties, even though they like to kind of insinuate that they do have.
Just like the emergency or the airborne things where it's like, you get vitamins and therefore it makes you immortal, right? Exactly. What's the difference between vitamin water and Gatorade, for example?
Well, Gatorade has lots of sugar and salt in it, and vitamin water doesn't have much of anything in it.
Gatorade is actually designed for athletes.
Yeah.
On the field for rehydration, replace electrolytes.
That's what plants crave.
And
help me out. What exactly is an electrolyte?
It's basically conductive material within you. It's the stuff
potassium and
it's just
sodium,
salts, basically. So I mean, if you just put salt and sugar in water, then you'd pretty much have
because sweat is very
exactly.
salts and stuff like that.
That's the stuff that you sweat out. Yeah, so it's replacing what's burnt off. But vitamin water doesn't do that. Vitamin water is just water with. It's like if you diluted Gatorade down to almost homeopathic levels.
Yeah.
Then you'd have vitamin water.
Vitamin water to me tastes like if you were to take a piece of Pez candy, break it in half, and drop it in that bottle and let it sit there overnight. That's kind of what it tastes like to me. It's not a great aftertaste, and it in that context doesn't taste good in itself, but also feels like there's really nothing to it.
Yeah.
But it's expensive, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So fucking jihad on them.
Yeah. It needs to die. My jihad this week, I am declaring jihad on automatic toilets. I hate them so much. I work in a place that pretty much everything is automatic toilets. And the main problems that I have with them is basically they'll go off whenever. And they seem to go off, and now this may be confirmation bias, but they seem to go off when either I just set down the toilet seat cover and it goes and shoots the thing back down in there, or right after I just finished my business and I'm standing up and then the thing goes off and erupts and shoots pee water at my legs. Like, what the fuck? And I'm like, I don't want a bidet, and certainly not a bidet with urine and fecal matter water. I don't understand why it's like. It's funny because some people will actually put tape over the sensor so that it never goes off.
And you have to push them in because there's a manual flush button there as well.
Yeah, there is. It's like I don't know why that's. They just seem to have a mind of their own and just go off all the time.
I think they're actually connected to cameras which are watching you, and then there's some practical joker on the other side who's just deciding when to flush it, just for shits and giggles.
But I just don't see any real reason for them to be there. It's like, I know it's the, Well,
people will say, hygienic thing, but it's just, whatever. Then have a foot pedal that you push and flushes it. That seems to make the most sense.
Yeah. Besides, all the bacteria and stuff all gets airborne anyway, so it's not like touching it is that much dirtier,
Just hold your breath in with an oxygen tank. Like a
and then
radiation suit.
go through the full cleansing upon leaving. The other thing is, this phobia for germs is actually making us less able to fight them off, because to a large extent exposure to it is what builds up our immunity to it. And so if we're constantly using antibacterial soap and little hand sanitizer every time you freaking shake somebody's hand, it's like we're gonna destroy our own immune systems.
Yeah, well, that's like having no army. As much as I like to talk about not having armies, but if you have no army, then someone attacks you.
You're fucked.
Yeah, you're fucked. You will lose.
Fucked.
Yeah.
Is their line of thinking that basically if we kill all the germs, then they won't survive to reproduce and to grow?
No, that's
it's all just sales
Protecting
propaganda.
Save the children.
It's just people trying to sell soap.
Well, because
Yeah,
there
fuck
are
the children.
there are bad bacteria, like if like strep and staph and stuff like that, where like in a hospital environment, where people are already
a lot of sense.
that they're
That's a petri dish.
well, I mean they're already they're in a weakened state, and so they're more susceptible to things. So you have to make sure that doctors going from one patient to the other aren't carrying the bacteria from one to the other directly. So
But in your standard neighborhood public restroom,
or just in everyday life, you don't need
no.
that kind of protection.
No.
And in fact, it's overprotection.
Yes.
Another thing that I see that annoys me is the they have those waterless urinals, and it says
That always smells so bad.
yeah, it's like it says it's funny because it'll say right on that thing in front of it that it both conserves water and improves sanitary conditions. I'm like, bullshit. What's more sanitary? Clean water sitting in the bottom of the tank or stagnant urine? Which one is more sanitary?
Who knows? I don't know. There's probably somebody who could elucidate us on that topic.
But, conserving water, okay, fine, I get it. They're not shooting a bunch of water down there and all that, but it's just pee lining the walls and filling the bowl of that thing. It's just sitting there. I don't see how that improves sanitary condition. It just
I don't know. I don't know if it's any worse or better than just standing water, because standing water is not all that great of a thing to have around anyway. But, it's probably more important to save the water anyway. I don't know. I like the flush-free urinals.
Yeah, I'm okay with
Maybe it's
them.
because I have a very inhibited sense of smell.
Yeah. No, it's not that I have a problem with them being there. I just don't like them labeling with bullshit.
That I will agree with.
Don't lie to me. It makes me angry. And you wouldn't like me when I'm angry. Then I will pee all over.
And I'll pee so hard I'll break your urinal. With my Hulk pee.
I think we're good, right?
Hulk P. Thank you for joining us once again this week on the Church of Awesome. We'd like to leave you with the gift of tongues.
En ruletrap kan aldrig paus. Kan det bara de trappa. Ruletrap mitcher dig trappa. Beklagar för det praktiska.
Like if you want what's best for your baby, you'll buy in the 100% grape juice from Welch's. Or your kid will invariably go to a life of crime if it's 98% juice. Someone should do something. Not me, of course, but...
The comments made by the hosts and other participants are the opinions of the individuals and not those of any corporate entity. All data and information provided in this program is for informational purposes only. The Church of Awesome makes no representations as to accuracy, completeness, currentness, suitability, or validity of any information in this program and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. If you like what you've heard in today's sermon, come visit us at churchofawesome.com or follow us on Twitter at COA Podcast.